Hi everybody, this is Stephen Pugh. We're going to continue with our City and Guilds course videos. This is video number 2 and we're beginning on the health and safety aspect of the course, which again is, let me just find that for you, it's going to be Unit 201. Now in Unit 201 we're going to be going through it quite quickly, although funnily enough, in health and safety there's a lot of very detailed figures and things that we need to know about. But let's plunge straight in. The first thing we notice is that the health and safety is a matter of legislation. This is a matter of English law, and the reason why this is so important is because in 2011 and 12, which is quite a while ago of course, but in 2011 and 12, according to the Health and Safety Executive, there were 49 people fatally injured. So what that really means is that the 49 people died in the UK in the construction industry. 23 of those people were self-employed people. So this is a very serious matter. This is not just about somebody being hurt or having a bump on the head. This is about people who die. They go to work and they never come home. That's a very serious matter indeed. To give you an idea, there are, amongst the people that are seriously injured, there were 51% of them were falls. Now the fall may include somebody that fell over, it could be somebody that fell from a height, or it could be something that fell upon them, okay? But about more than half of the injuries come as a result of falls. 16% of accidents occur as a result of being struck by a falling or a moving object. Now this might be something falling on their head, which is very dangerous. I had that happen to me once. Something hit me on the head just at the very moment when I took my hat off for just a minute and something hit me. It was only a small brick, but it was enough to really cause us quite a serious injury. And also it is either a falling or a moving object. It could be something that's moving that hits them. 10% of accidents are caused by a collapse. Now a collapse could be lots of different things. It could be the collapse of scaffolding, or it could be the collapse of a work area. There's all sorts of ways whereby things can hurt you. And 10% of them, quite ironically, are accidents as a result of electricity. Wow, now we don't really know what that is, and we don't really know how bad that is. But I've also had electric shocks in the past, especially after asking the electrician to make sure that electricity is turned off, and he assures me that it's turned off, and then I get an electric shock. In my particular case, it wasn't fatal, of course, I'm still here, but it was quite a shocker, 240 volts is quite serious. I didn't actually, I wasn't actually earthed, I wasn't standing on the ground. If I'd have been standing on the ground, it might have been a different matter altogether, but I was standing on joists at the time. Being hit by a vehicle, 4%. Now that doesn't sound like very much, but imagine you're on a building site and a vehicle just backs straight into you, maybe runs you straight over. That's a serious matter. This is why high visibility vests are so important. Now all these accidents, they have quite a devastating effect in the lives of people, not only for husbands and wives, but for children, for little ones. Sometimes if somebody dies completely, then it means that that family has lost a person that they'll never ever get back again. There is also another cost, not only the cost in human life and bereavement, but there's also a cost in terms of loss financial injury claims. People, when they go out of work because of illness, they lose their livelihood, they lose their house, they lose their job, they lose their car, they lose living. So these are all exceptionally difficult claims, and claims are made, but often the claims are never sufficient to cater for what was lost. There's also a loss to people resulting from persecution. If you're the owner of a company and you find that somebody dies, you might lose your job, and you might lose your business, and you might lose So many different things, but the important thing is you might even lose your liberty. People go to jail for being health and safety careless. And of course, lastly, you might lead to the loss of work, it's also a breakdown of the company fabric. So, for example, the company's health and safety policy suffers, and the business secretary suffers, and the business financial controller suffers. In fact, the whole business suffers. It really can be a devastating effect in a business when there are accidents, especially big accidents. Now, in the UK, there are 11 Acts of Parliament. Now, an Act of Parliament is something that has to go towards the House of Commons, and then it has to go to the House of Lords. It has to be read a couple of times, and then finally it becomes an Act of Law. And there are 11 Acts of Parliament which are regulations in which the government has stepped in to prevent accidents from happening. And they also talk about people's roles and responsibilities. So let's look at those 14 acts briefly. First of all, there is the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is often called HASAWA, 1974. There is the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health, which is COSHH, regulations of 2002. There is the Reporting of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrences regulations, RIDDOR we call it, which is 1995. There is the Construction Design and Management regulations of 2007. There's the Provision and Use of Work Equipment regulations, that PURE is called, that's 1998. There is the Manual Handling Operations regulations, which is 1992. There's Personal Protective Equipment at Work regulations, which is also 1992. There's Working at Height regulations, 2005 as amended. There's Lifting Operations and Lifting Equipment regulations, which is called LOLA, which is 1998. There is the Control of Noise at Work regulations, 2005, and the Control of Vibration at Work regulations, also 2005. Now, all of these regulations are different, that all of them are specific over a particular issue, and every single one of them is concerned with protecting the health and the safety of people at work. So let's go through some of these regulations. There's not a great deal to say about them all, so we won't be reading this, but we will be actually talking about it. And let's go through the first. So the first one then is Health and Safety at Work Act, which is HASAWA, 1974. That's going back a long time, isn't it? 1974. This applies to all workplaces, but especially it will apply to building sites and to workshops, which are covered by the legislation. So the first thing we need to remember is that the employer has got key responsibilities. Let's list them. Let's just go through them. The first thing is he must provide a safe working environment. There's no excuse for this. He must provide a place that's safe for the workers to come and work. He must provide safe access, that is entrance into the place of work, and also a safe exit from the place of work. It's no good saying, well, you've got to climb over a fence, and then you've got to climb over some timber, and then you've got to climb over a wall. Now that's not a safe access, and it's not a safe exit. There must be a safe access, there must be a safe ingress or exit. The employer must provide adequate staff training. Now then, adequate staff training, that's an interesting one. You know, a lot of accidents are based on the building site as a result of ignorance. People just don't understand correctly how to operate certain things or how to be safe, and so adequate staff training is very important. They must have a written health and safety policy in place. Now this is a statement, a long statement. It's in the form of a small book. It's a statement of how they are going to go about operating in a safe manner. That's very important. They must carry out regular risk assessments. Wow, they must have risk assessments. Now, even a company as small as 5 people need to have risk assessments. When you get right the way down to the size of a company of 5 people, you don't need to have reams of paper, but you do need to at least taken the time to assess the risks and the people that are going to be at risk and what measures are going to be taken to prevent them from being hurt. There must be a health and safety information poster displayed at the workplace. Got that? There must be a health and safety poster placed at the workplace. There needs to be safe machinery and equipment to ensure that it is well maintained and in a safe condition. Now, a lot of companies are very, very poor at doing this, and often the machinery doesn't get maintained very well, and the blades, for example, tend to get very mucky and full of resin, or maybe there's too much debris on the floor, or maybe there isn't proper dust extraction, maybe the machines are just not set up correctly. When machines are not set up correctly, or if they become dirty and they are not maintained, or maybe they're not oiled or they're not greased, then we have a serious problem. I mean, I went into a workshop just the other day and the planing machine was in a shocking condition. If you tried to plane it, you'd find you'd end up with runs of lines in the wood. It just was not a clean blade. Now, these are all health and safety issues. There's no excuse for having blunt tools and poor machinery. There must be adequate supervision, okay, to ensure safe practices are carried out. There has to be somebody at the workplace that says, just a minute now, stop, this isn't safe. We need to not do it this way. There needs to be somebody like that. I've been in workshops where the most horrendous things happen. I've seen lots of accidents. I've seen fingers taken off. I've seen all sorts of things happen over the years, and this is not a funny thing. You know, there was a custom that we had whereby we would come out of a workshop when certain people entered it because we knew that they were going to be dangerous. So that's very sad, isn't it? There needs to also be a trade union safety representative. Of course, we're talking about a reasonably large firm, but there needs to be trade union safety representatives, and there also needs to be the provision of personal protective equipment free of charge. Now, that's very important. There's no excuse for employers to charge you for a new hat or for gloves or for goggles or masks. They must be provided by the employer, and there's no excuse. And all of that personal protective equipment, funnily enough, it remains the possession of the employer. If you're self-employed and you leave with a hat that isn't yours, that you didn't pay for, then they can quite adequately deduct it from your wages. They must also, these are all employers' responsibilities, they must ensure that materials and substances are transported, used and stored safely. Having a big pile of bricks or having a big pile of timber that's just dumped in a pile, or having stuff that's, you know, littered around the place, there's no excuse for that. That's just an accident waiting to happen. And so the employer must be tidy. They must ensure that the materials and the substances are transported and used and stored safely. There we are. So there we are. That's the employer's responsibility. Now, one of the things that was in that list is that there needs to be risk assessments and method statements. Now, I'm not going to propose to go through all what's involved in a risk assessment just now, but suffice to say that the employers must carry out regular risk assessments. Now, there's a particular format that's become the common format in the industry, and that's the format that is expected to be used. The risk assessment will identify hazards to people. It will also identify those people that are particularly at risk of injury or hurt as a result of accidents. The risk assessment will also evaluate the seriousness of the injury and will take steps on the risk assessment to make sure that those injuries are lessened. Okay. If there is an unacceptable risk, then the risk assessment will state how that job will not take place and that other means will be used to prevent that risk from happening. Now, if the risk is acceptable, what we mean by acceptable is that there's minor injuries that very possibly could happen, then there will be some measures taken to reduce those risks. There may be some training or some special equipment, or maybe certain PPE that will be needed to be used. There will also be some good records. And what the records are, they're not there designed to try to find out who's at fault. They're just there to try to find out what's actually happening so that in the future these risks can be alleviated. Now, along with a risk assessment, there needs to be, as a secondary document, a method statement. A lot of people don't really understand what a method statement is, but a method statement is something that goes alongside the risk assessment and describes how something is going to be carried out in such a way that the risks are minimized. That's the purpose of the method statement. It is actually a requirement by law as much as the risk assessment is, and it is really just a description. It's a little bit like a code of practice. It's a description of how we're going to work in a way in which people will not be hurt by that method. So there we are. There's a lot of paperwork involved, isn't there? Not vast amount, but there's a lot of paperwork, and it's important paperwork. Now, it goes without saying that when somebody is taken on to a new building site or goes into a new workshop, that there should be an induction. Now, an induction is a thorough briefing. We're thinking of it here in terms of health and safety and welfare, but that there needs to be a thorough induction to understand who's who, to understand what are the accident procedures, to find out who to ring when something goes wrong. Alongside a thorough induction, which has to be signed, of course, there needs to be an introduction to the people and to the site and to the facilities available. That's very important at the beginning of a new job. As well as that, there needs to be what's called in the industry Toolbox Talks, and these will be carried out by the foreman, or it'll be carried out by the charge hand. His job is to just do regular updates and to point out some of the dangers that are still around. The Toolbox Talk will talk about the particular operation that they're going to be doing. So they may say, well, we're going to be putting on the trusses today on such and such a house, and you are going to be doing it, and you need to just, and there will be 2 or 3 pointers. You need to just be careful about this. When the crane comes in to lift them on, you need to just make sure you do this. In other words, there will be a sort of an induction, an ongoing induction and talk on how safety can be ensured on the site. Now, it's not all down to the employer. Those are all the employer's responsibilities. There are also employee responsibilities. So, for example, you must work in a safe manner and you must take care of yourself at all times. Your responsibility is to look after yourself primarily. However, you also have a duty not only to look after yourself, but to work in such a manner that other people are not hurt by the things that you do. Got that? So if you're working on skirting an architrave and you're putting doors on, you don't want to be leaving trip hazards all over the place. You don't want to be leaving nails sticking up out of wood so people can tread on them. You don't want to be leaving your debris just for people to fall over. Yes, that's a very practical thing, isn't it? So you need to work in such a way that you're not actually a danger to other people. You must cooperate with your employer in regard to health and safety. Okay, so if the health and safety guy comes round to see you, you can't just say, oh, just go away, I'm busy. Your job is to cooperate with the health and safety advisor or inspector or the foreman. And during your time on site, there must be no play acting. There must be no practical jokes and horseplay and play fighting and throwing things around at each other. These things are all very dangerous. You know, you might pick up a brick and throw it at somebody in fun, but that could really hurt them and create an injury. You must use any equipment and safeguards provided by your employer. So if you've got a saw, you don't take the saw guard off it. You know, if you've got some tools, you don't take the guards off your tools. You need to keep them on. They've been provided by the employer. If your employer provides you with a hat, then you must wear the hat. If he provides you with goggles, then wear the goggles. If he provides you with a high visibility vest, then you must wear it. So you must cooperate with the company policy in which they're trying to protect you. Also, you must not interfere with or tamper with any safety equipment. So for example, if you've got a saw being in use, you don't fiddle with it, don't play with it, don't take a guard off it and walk away. You need to actually remain with it. Okay, you need to remain with it and you need to stay with it. So there we are. On top of that, all sites, generally speaking, should have somebody, even if it's a small team of 2 or 3, should have somebody that's a first aider. Okay, now that might be the foreman, or it might be one of the key workers, but somebody somewhere needs to pick up the pieces. So somebody really should have some first aid training, and their responsibility is to give that first aid training first of all. Now, of course, if you're working with somebody and they fall over and they have a nasty gash, we don't expect you to pick up the pieces. You don't expect you to, but you wouldn't want them to bleed to death either till the first aider comes. So, you know, we need to use common sense here. Ringing 999 is going to be good. Calling for the first aid is even better because they're much closer. And the first aider needs to make sure that they're regularly trained and that the facilities that they need in the first aid box are up to date and adequate for the treating of people. There must be nothing in the first aid box in terms of medicine. There's no medicines to be given in first aid. It's just actually somebody that's just there to reassure and to call for help and to make sure they don't bleed, or maybe they may need some resuscitation. So there we are. There's all the details in relation to first aid. Now the next issue we need to talk about here, we've only got a few more minutes to go, is sources of information for health and safety. Now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's at least 6 sources of information. The first is the Health and Safety Executive. Now this is actually a government body that oversees health and safety in the workplace. It produces health and safety literature such as the approved Code of Practice. Now, a Code of Practice is a very simple, easy to understand way of working that will automatically ensure that things are done safely. So instead of just giving you a list of rules, they give you a way of working that is safe, and that's a very important thing. There's also the construction skills. Now this is an industry body, a training body, which produced literature and is directly involved in the training, especially of young people. There's the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents. There's the Royal Society for Public Health, the Institution for Occupational Safety and Health, and there's the British Safety Council. Now they all have their own unique way of working. Some of them are small bodies and some of them are very big bodies, but they're all in the industry and they're all about health and safety. Now the Health and Safety Executive itself, or sometimes we call it HSE, is this government body. They have a lot of teeth, they have a lot of power. They're the sort of people that can come in and stop a building site immediately. They can come into a workshop and lock the door and kick everybody out and say, look, this is not a safe place, so everybody must now leave. They have a lot of powers. They can come with the police. The Health and Safety Executive is a government body. They can issue an improvement notice. Now, an improvement notice is a notice, an official document given by the Health and Safety Executive which demands certain improvements to be made. You know, there's no pussyfooting around. They're going to say, this is what you must do, and they will expect that to be done. They usually give a short amount of time for the improvements to be made. There's also a prohibition notice. Now they may come in and they may issue a notice which means you are not allowed to do this anymore. You cannot work unsafely anymore. Now the duties of Health and Safety Executive primarily are to give advice. They are to issue improvement and prohibition notices. They are to caution people, to say, no, this is not great, this needs to be better. They are there to prosecute, and they are there, of course, to investigate. So they have quite a lot of powers. They're a little bit like the police for health and safety. That's sort of who they are. Now then, just a couple of things before we finish this particular segment. We're going to talk briefly about the control of substances hazardous to health, which is the COSHH regulations of 2002. And most important thing you need to know about this is that when new products come to your building site or new products come for you to use, it's important to read and check the COSHH safety data sheet. There will be a data sheet issued, or at least it can be requested. Say, for example, a new chemical comes for you to be used, ask for the COSHH sheet, and on that COSHH sheet there'll be everything. It'll list what the chemical is, it'll list who you need to get help from, it'll list what you need to do if an accident occurs, it'll list what the risks are and what the treatment would be if somebody's hurt. You need to also check with the supplier to see if there are any known risks to health. You can use the trade press, you can talk to your friends, you can find out what's going on in the industry, and you can use the Health and Safety Executive website and other websites to check for any known issues with the substance or material. You know, sometimes when we're working, we're issued with particular chemicals. You might be, for example, a chemical in terms of dry rot or something like that. It's very important that we don't let that come into contact with our skin. We most certainly never want it to go into our mouths. You know, these things are deadly substances. So, and of course, in the COSHH sheets, there will be notices in relation to breathing it, in relation to swallowing it, in relation to getting it in our eyes or through our skin, okay, or through cuts in our skin. There have been some substances which in the past were pretty lethal. And for example, if you take creosote, put a drop of creosote on your skin and it will actually immediately sink straight down into the skin and go straight into the bloodstream. So that's why that stuff is not able to be sold anymore. No one's even allowed to use that stuff anymore. It's far, far, far too dangerous. Now, on the safety data sheets, there will be all sorts of information. They will give you notices with regard to the European signals. There's some European signals or symbols that describe how bad something is. For example, it could be described as toxic or very toxic. It could be described as harmful or an irritant. It may be described as being highly flammable or extremely flammable. I don't know what the difference is between highly and extremely, but anyway, it could be described as something that's explosive or dangerous to the environment, or something that is an oxidizer, something that will burst into flames at any minute's notice, and also something that is corrosive. Now, the new international symbols are similar but different, and you need to really sort of acquaint yourself with what these things really mean. So there then need to be some control measures. Now, these control measures in order of importance are, first of all, to eliminate the use of the harmful substance altogether, if at all possible. The second thing is to use a safer form of a similar product. So, for example, say you were using paint or you were using preservative, you might find that some of them are water-based and not as dangerous. You might change the way in which you work so that there is less of the substance being used. You might enclose the work area. You might use extraction or filtration, like a dust bag. You might keep operatives out of the area or keep them to a minimum within an area. And you will, of course, definitely provide, your employers will provide appropriate PPE. So all these things are very, very important, and I'm sure that you all understand the seriousness of matters like this. Well, there we are. That's the end of our second video. We look forward to speaking to you on the next video. God bless you. Bye for now.